Oh hi, welcome to Hell, aka part 2 of my exploration of the most disturbing visual novel ever written, The Song of Saya. There's no need to yap too much in this intro, so I'll just skip to the necessary warnings. First of all, this is part 2, so if this video just got randomly recommended to you, hi, I'm Hadel, and I suggest reconsidering the quality of the content you consume on YouTube. But if you don't feel like it, there's a link to part 1 that will appear on the upper right corner of the screen, if I remember to put it there. Second thing, spoiler warning, obviously, we are in the middle of the story and I will be going over the endings in this video. And thirdly, this game tells a horrible, horrible story. It was written with the intent to shock, and it has everything from gore to extreme violence to sexual assault. So if you're uncomfortable with any of those, please use discretion if you intend to watch this. Though I tried to make this video funny and I made jokes about even the most fucked up situations, the contents of the story itself are really messed up. From where we left off, Fuminori had just arrived home and saw Saya being assaulted by his neighbor Yosuke. He kills the neighbor and immediately heads over to Saya to comfort her. After a little talk, she confesses that she has the capacity to fix Fuminori's hallucinations and asks whether he wants to go through with that. If he agrees, she does a sneaky lobotomy on him and fixes his perception, which leads to the ending we covered on the last video. However, if you decline the lobotomy-themed makeout session, Saya tells Fuminori that the guy he just killed was in fact his next-door neighbor, and we get a little insight into his mind. He says that even though he and his neighbor were on good terms before the accident and that he was a kind man, he feels absolutely no remorse for brutally killing him. The kindly painter who lived next door is but a distant memory. The pieces of meat around me belong to a creature whose mere existence was nauseating. This feeling isn't exclusive to Yosuke though, as very early in the story, Fuminori says he wants to bash Koji's head in with a chair. Living the life he has, and more specifically living with Saya, is turning him into an awful person. We'll see an even worse example of that shortly, don't you worry. At this point in the story, the only thing Fuminori cares about is Saya. Nothing else in the real world matters to him anymore. Not his actions, not the people he met, and especially not how much pain he inflicts on them, be it purposeful or not. Can you blame him? Absolutely, both him and Saya are objectively awful people, even if they are the protagonists of the story. But my point here is that, yes, even though their actions are not justifiable, they are understandable. Our senses are the only way with which we can perceive reality. If you take away your senses, then you're just a grain of conscience floating in the infinite nothing. There is this philosophical postulation that we might be living inside a simulation, but regardless of whether you think this is true or not, I don't think it makes a difference. Things are as they are, and the knowledge of an external factor doesn't really alter anything. Even if I am a bolt-swing brain, my life will continue to be as it is and as it always was, because fundamentally, the information that my senses are giving me remains the same regardless of whether this is real or not. And this is basically what is happening to Fuminori. For all practical purposes, reality is what we can perceive. Knowing some grander truth doesn't alter or invalidate the feelings or pains of an individual. So, even though Fuminori knows that the world is completely normal, his very way of experiencing reality is compromised. As a result, he cannot help but act according to the reality that he perceives. Is it right or ethical to do that? No, but it is human. It is a way of minimizing his pain. His complacency is also a way of dealing with it, justifying to himself that it's okay to act the way he's acting. My hands are wet with another man's blood, and yet I am utterly calm. Now I know what I lost in the accident. Saya says that I can take it back, but I know that I cannot. It's gone forever, just like the life of the man called Yosuke Suzui. This, however, also serves as a moment of realization for him. Hey Saya, no doctor could possibly fix my condition, you know? Fuminori? You can do what no other human is capable of. You're not human, are you? Everything is monstrous and loathsome in my eyes. Everything but Saya. I thought that she was somehow unique. I was wrong. I see her just as I do everything else, as something other than what she truly is. But why should this surprise me? Saya is a part of my world, just as I am a part of hers. It doesn't change what we are to each other. In this scene, Fuminori not only accepts that Saya is probably not entirely human, but also accepts that it doesn't really matter what she is because he loves her regardless. Wholesome? I don't know. The one thing that I can know for sure is that this motherfucker is past the point of being fixed. Anyway, he begins to hack away at Yosuke's entrails to get that yummy meat. This is the point when he realizes that the world is flipped in his vision, making pleasant things horrible and vice versa, and says that he should probably dispose of Yosuke's family as well before they go to the police. Little does he know, on a previous visit to the Yogai residence, Fuminori found a couple of photographs of a house that might serve as clues. His next errand would be to go to the location written in the back of the photographs, in the middle of rural Japan, where the doctor could be hiding at. Surprisingly, Saya protests against that, saying that she doesn't really care about her dad anymore and that she prefers if it's just the two of them. Fuminori finds that a little strange, but says that he wants to check it out anyway because he wants to meet Dr. Ogai and find out more about Saya. Even if he doesn't find him there, an isolated house in the middle of a forest could be of use. Before falling asleep, Saya asks Fuminori if he would want to have more friends around, or at least some people he could interact with, to which he says that it would indeed be more fun. But Saya is really all that he needs. She nods and then says she'll find something to make him happy. In other words, she's gonna do a little trolling again. So on the next day, he walks up to Koji and convinces him to take him on a 3-hour trip to bumfuck nowhere to check out the residence, and Koji is suspicious of him the whole way there. In the meantime, Yo is sitting alone at the cafeteria when suddenly she receives a text from Omi of all people. It tells her that if she wants to find out about Fuminori's secrets, she should come to his house alone, and you can bet your ass that she's gonna fall for that. Okay, so the sequence of events that are about to happen to Yo is probably the heaviest part of the entire game, so I'm just gonna make fun of her now instead of later. Okay, there are so many red flags here, because like, sure, go into the house of your psychotic ex-friend after receiving a text from a girl who's been missing for a week telling you to come alone. Surely it's just a silly prank, isn't it? Waiter, more clueless women please. Fucking hell. Well, she gets to his home while receiving text from Omi's number telling her to come closer. She goes to Fuminori's room, and Saya does the aforementioned little trolling in a very bad and very graphic scene. This part is more terror focused, so it's a bit better than the last one, but not by much. But don't get your hopes up though, in just a little bit we will see the outcome of the most fucked up thing to happen in this entire visual novel. Okay, so Koji is driving Fuminori to Ogai's retreat and he's suspicious of him all the way there, right? They arrive and Fuminori is acting super chill and casual, but Koji can't help but feel like there's malice behind his smile. They spend some time exploring the house and eventually Koji goes to the backyard where there is a conveniently placed well. He leans against the well and begins to call Dr. Tanbo to tell her that he is suspicious of Fuminori. She doesn't answer, so he resorts to recording a voicemail and tells her his location and predicament. He also calls Yo to see how she's doing, and after the number rings for an alarmingly long time, she picks up. He doesn't hear anything at first. The only sound is of something not exactly human crying on the other end of the line. Tsukuba? Is that you? Who's there? He can tell that there's a lot of agony in the voice on the other end of the line, something that I'm not going to do because I'm not a voice actor. Something went terribly wrong. It's Koji. Is that you, Tsukuba? Where are you? After a short period of nothing but pained moans, the words start coming out through the speaker, one by one, as though each takes an act of will. I was attacked by a monster, and now there's something wrong with my body. What? What happened? Are you alright? He has a really hard time understanding what she's saying, but he can tell from the gasps and wheezes that she is in unimaginable pain. I'm rotting away. My skin is melting. My ear just came off. Help me, Koji. This isn't how my fingers are supposed to look. Call the cops, Tsukuba. Call for help. No, I can't let anyone see me like this. Jesus Christ. What the maybe I should consider the voice acting. What the fuck? She begins to cough violently, and as Koji is trying to instruct her, Fuminori sneaks up behind him and pushes him into the well. He falls hard and fucks his back, but is otherwise okay. Fuminori mocks him a little bit, then tosses his phone back at him without the battery, then leaves him to die there. Fuminori's next objective would be to get rid of Yo, as she is the last person who could spoil his plans. He tries to think of a way to dispose of her, but can't come up with anything until he returns home. Saya comes up to greet him and tells him that she has a little surprise for him waiting upstairs. Once they arrive at the bedroom, Fuminori finds Yo in her human form, completely naked and sobbing quietly in a corner of the room. Naturally, Fuminori is shocked to finally see another human other than Saya. How does she look like to you? Saya asks. She's beautiful. This girl loves you, you know, so I decided to change her body into one that you can love as well. I made her like me. What? How? Don't you remember what I said the other day? I can mold the body of other living creatures. It was a big change this time, not like the little tweak I made to the man next door. This is how my abilities are really meant to be used. But this was my first time doing it though. Well, that's pretty fucking evident. Motherfucker looks like a Resident Evil 5 campaign extra after she was done with her. Whatever it was that Saya did to Yo, it was a process so traumatizing that it left her unable to even process the world around her. It is said in-game that she doesn't even have the cognitive faculties for speech anymore. To quote the novel itself, there is no similarity between what she was and what she is, which can only mean that she has become something utterly inhuman. According to Saya, she has become what Saya is. Except not really, because it's implied that Yo still maintained her human perception and was fully conscious of everything happening to her. Fuminori is confused about how Saya was able to do that, and the answer she gives him is that basically, so every night when they would demonetize this video together, Fuminori would give her this nice pie, this handful of nuts, and she would use the DNA from these nuts to decipher the human genome inside her body. What the f? Saya approaches her and Yo tries to crawl away, but she is only able to flail her arms and legs wildly because she doesn't really know how to move her own body. Gee, I wonder why. She can't talk? I guess the change broke her mind a little bit. I mean, it did take a whole 20 hours. She must have suffered a lot. I feel kinda bad. Oh, well, whoopsie. Do you like her? You said you wanted friends and a family, didn't you? This is why I got you this present. Present? Come on, she's not a dog. There's not much difference. Her head is completely empty. Yeah, I gotta agree with her on that one. And would you believe me if I told you that this isn't even the most fucked up part about all this? Basically, Fuminori is a bit hesitant about keeping Yo, not because she might cause trouble, but because he is embarrassed about how his body is responding to having a naked woman in his bedroom. Now, my dear viewer, if you want to have your day even further ruined, you need only realize that in reality, this man is standing in his room looking at the deformed, mutilated body of his former friend, and he is rock hard. And as if it wasn't enough already, there's another sex scene here that shows a very sadistic side of Fuminori. Here he is having relations with Yo, and it serves to show that his cruelty goes far beyond his love for Saya, as he seems to genuinely enjoy inflicting torment upon her. It is a very graphic scene, so I'll only share this line with you. She must not have been fully prepared, as her choked scream is like that of a dying animal. In fact, it reminded me of how Yosuke screamed when I stabbed him with my knife. Okay, fuck that scene, it's over. One last thing to note is that during the pillow talk, Fuminori asks Saya what she really is, and she tells him that she is like a dandelion seed that has drifted onto the desert, where not a single blade of grass is growing. Imagine how lonely that little seed must feel. That seed is still a baby flower. If it does its best, it can turn even the desert into a garden. Perhaps that little seed will decide to thrive. Maybe it will decide to grow and multiply so that it can turn the whole desert into a beautiful field of dandelions. And all it needs to do is to be loved by just one person in the entire desert. Alright, in the meantime, Koji is rotting in the well, right? A day passes and eventually he hears the sound of a car engine. He begins to scream for help and is pleasantly surprised to see that Dr. Tanbo is just outside the well. She gets down to help him up and explains that she only got there because of the voicemail he sent her. This is both when Koji and we notice that she's both behaving and dressing a lot differently from what we've seen her, being a lot more casual and nonchalant about everything. She tells him that she had done a bit of digging on Ogai before, but this was the first time she had come to a place like this, and if it wasn't for Koji, she would never have found the secret passage in the well. And that's when Koji notices that some of the bricks at the bottom of the wells are different from the rest. And, when pushed, they reveal a secret passage. The two walk down a derelict corridor and come face to face with an old wooden door. Dr. Tanbo pulls out a fucking shotty and then kicks it down. What they found on the other side is a laboratory with a bunch of weird artifacts and writing scattered everywhere. Dr. Tanbo immediately tells Koji to not look or touch anything as she begins to spray paint all over the weird symbols and artifacts of the lab, and instead of looking at them directly, she is using the screen of a camera she had brought along. As Koji is busy doing nothing, he asks where Dr. Ogai could be, and Tanbo simply points at the corner of the room. There, hidden behind the Chinese folding screens, lies the dry carcass of Dr. Ogai. There's a hole in his temple, and he was clinging onto a pistol that he used to off himself. Koji eventually passes out and wakes up half a day later in one of the bedrooms of the mountain retreat. Dr. Tanbo is in the room with him and she's sitting on a desk trying to decipher Ogai's notes. He asks Tanbo what's going on and she tells him that that's precisely what she's trying to find out. She asks if the name Saya rings a bell, and Koji declines, and she tells him that based on what she could decipher, if Fuminori had already gotten involved with this Saya, then he was already past the point of no return. That's when she shines a bit of light on Dr. Ogai's experiments. We will get to those shortly. Koji is still very much concerned about Omi and especially Yo, and tells the doctor that he will go back to Tokyo to try to save her. Dr. Tanbo reluctantly agrees and gives him Dr. Ogai's pistol, a revolver with 4 bullets that will surely be used very wisely. That's when Koji leaves the house and begins to drive back to Tokyo, but not before giving Fuminori a call. This isn't a plot hole, he has 2 phones. Fuminori is surprised to get a call from him, and the two have a not so amicable discussion about what would happen next. Koji uses the knowledge he has as leverage and tells him that he has met Dr. Ogai and he knows about Saya, and that he's ready to fuck him up anytime unless he strikes a deal with him. If Fuminori is willing to no longer harm anyone and guarantee Yo and Omi's safety, he will destroy all the evidence he has on Saya and Ogai. Fuminori doesn't know that he actually ate Omi, so he tells Koji that he doesn't know what happened to her, but he tells him that he does indeed have Yo. Koji tells him that as long as he let her go, the bargain is valid, otherwise there would be consequences. He finishes the call by telling him that he would call again eventually, and he had up until then to make up his mind. Could be an hour, could be a minute, but in reality it would probably be the time it will take for Koji to drive all the way back to Tokyo. Cut to Fuminori in the middle of a sex scene because fuck this game, and he tells Saya that he needs to get her and Yo and leave that place as soon as possible in order to not get caught by Koji. Cut back to Dr. Tanbo as she's decoding Ogai's notes, and we get a few interesting insights about the true nature of Saya, referred to as the organism in the research notes. For one, it has a very insatiable thirst for knowledge and learns new information very quickly, picking up on advanced linguistic concepts such as puns just a week after making contact with Ogai for the first time. It begins to converse with Ogai at a high level and explains that it only gains self-awareness after materializing in the universe. In other words, it doesn't know where it came from, but Ogai postulates that it's not a naturally occurring organism, but rather the creation of an even more sophisticated life form. It might be some sort of reconnaissance drone from another world. The organism is shown to have processing power superior to even supercomputers, being able to calculate a bunch of undiscovered prime numbers in its head. Eventually, Ogai begins to give it a bunch of books since those could supply it with new information faster than conversation with him ever could. It first had an interest in math, but then its attention shifted to sociology and the natural sciences. When it learned about DNA, the organism seemed excited, which was weird because it hadn't shown any emotional response beforehand. When asked about its reaction, it said that it was more like an instinctive response. A little while later, the organism asks for the seeds of males, I'm not kidding, it's literally written like that in the novel, and starts identifying itself as a female. Ogai brings mutts and rats to her and she begins to experiment on them. The most interesting part here is that from the samples that Ogai gave her, she was not only able to create a few little fucked up rats from it, but she would also spend some time operating on them. Based on Ogai's observations, the organism's body was designed with the specific purpose of manipulating the biology of other living things. By the end of the notes, he says that he named the organism Saya, as that was the name of his mother's cat and the name that he would have given to his daughter had he ever had a child. Back to my boy Koji, who had just arrived at Fuminori's house. He carefully checks every room and realizes that the house had been left abandoned. As he's checking the rooms, he sees just how much insanity his old friend was hiding beneath the cold exterior. Both the painted living room and the blood-stained sink are pretty good indicators. As his suspicions grow, Koji opens the freezer to see a shit ton of bodies stocked there and realizes that Fuminori had been eating them. Among the severed body parts was Omi's hand. While shocked and livid as fuck, Koji decides to make a phone call, either to Fuminori or to Dr. Tanbo. We get to decide, and our decision will lead us to one of two endings. Let's go with Fuminori first because mentally ill people are objectively fucking hilarious. So they have a call and they agree to meet at Ogai's house in the suburbs to settle things at 7 PM of that day. Now, one thing that is very evident from both perspectives is that they fully intend on killing each other. Koji didn't know this, but Fuminori had escaped to some sanatorium in the middle of the woods, which is very fitting given the mental state of his family. Fuminori begins to plan a way to kill Koji. Since the latter is bigger and stronger, Fuminori needs both heavy ordnance and a strategy. He goes into the city and buys an axe, and once he's back, he begins to plan a way to take down his old friend. And in this scene, two things happen that I feel would be interesting to take note of. First is that Saya suggests that he tests the axe on Yo. A bit fucked up by her part, but the interesting thing is that he says he's reluctant to hurt a human, or more specifically something that he sees as a human, but tells Saya that he has no qualms about killing Koji because he just sees him as a weird fleshy monster. And with Saya herself being a weird fleshy monster, she gets a bit grumpy. The second thing is that as they're planning their strategies, Saya suggests that she could try hunting him since she has experience hunting animals for food. Oh, so now you can fight and win against a healthy, strong 20-year-old guy even though the middle-aged sedentary man next door gave you trouble like 2 days ago. Fuck this game, dude. They even acknowledge this in the story as Fuminori says that he doesn't want to put Saya in any danger after what happened to their neighbor. I already explained why this is stupid in the first part, so let's not linger here any longer than we need. Eventually they come up with a plan that is not revealed to us, and if we are to follow the rules of storytelling, if a plan is not revealed to the audience, it will probably work. Koji goes to Ogai's house and just waits there until the time comes. Once the clock strikes 7 PM, he gets a call from Fuminori telling him to come over to the sanatorium for the actual confrontation. Koji is suspicious and scared and tired from spending like a day in a well, but he steals himself and drives a short distance to the sanatorium. The moment he gets off the car, he can see that the place is completely fucked up. It's covered in trash and debris and looked as if it had been abandoned for a long time. He's scared shitless, but knows that he has to go through with it regardless. Clutching onto his revolver and flashlight, he steps into the derelict structure. Koji is very careful to check each and every room of the long entrance corridor since Fuminori could be hiding in any of them, just waiting to ambush him, but he isn't anywhere to be seen. He doesn't want to turn on his flashlight since that would mean broadcasting his exact location to Fuminori, so he just stays low-key and as he treads through the corridor halls until he hears the sound of something wet and squishy. He decides to investigate, eventually arriving at a dark, sparse room where the noise was seemingly emanating from. Standing in that room, he begins to hear additional sounds, something akin to pain breathing and sobbing. He doesn't want to turn on his flashlight as he feels like doing so would have disastrous consequences, so he simply shouts into the darkness, "Who's there?" "Koji?" It was a quiet voice, barely louder than a whisper, but it sounded utterly inhuman. And it was on that moment that he connected the dots. The voice was awfully similar to the one he had heard on the phone call during his trip to the Ogai mountain retreat. It was his friend Yo, or at least whatever was left of her. At that moment he was panicking. The Yo he knew didn't sound like that, didn't smell like that. But then, what could explain it knowing his name? The creature speaks again. "Please, Koji, kill me. It hurts. This body always hurts." The creature begins to shamble towards him amidst the pain cries of agony. Koji stands paralyzed and calls her name once again. "Is it you, Tsukuba? Is it really you? Let me die. Please, no more. Kill me." He feels something wet at his feet, and against his better judgment, he finally turns on his flashlight. The moment he lays eyes on the slimy creature, I actually wrote this on the script, what the fuck? Clutching at his feet, dread overwhelms him. Terror wipes his mind of all but 2 words, gun and trigger. Instincts override all rationality, and Koji fucking blasts Yo with every round he had on his revolver. Every single one of them hits, but other than splashing filthy goo on him, she didn't seem to take too much damage. That's not to say it didn't hurt. Saya had said that both Yo's body and her own are very resilient, but the pain is real. Koji keeps pulling the trigger long after he runs out of ammunition and eventually falls to the ground. Yo crawls on top of him and repeatedly screams and begs for him to kill her. He feels around the floor to see if he can get anything that could resemble a weapon and finds a rusty old pipe. Without a second thought, he begins to bash the creature repeatedly, again and again and again. Parts of it fly off, but it keeps moving and clutching onto him. He keeps bashing 10, 20, 30 times. It stops moving at some point, but he keeps beating it until it's nothing more than a puddle of warm, viscous liquid. And that's the exact moment when Fuminori appears behind him and swings at him with the Axibot. Koji narrowly dodges and is slightly stunned to see the mocking smile in Fuminori's face. But after seeing the thing that Yo had become, pretty much nothing else could impress him anymore. He immediately swings his pipe at Fuminori, who quickly backsteps and proceeds to shit-talk him for a little bit. And then the two actually begin to duke it out in a fight scene that unironically goes insanely hard. Koji is having quite an easy time with Fuminori despite being at a significant disadvantage. Bro ended up breaking 2 of Fuminori's ribs and leaving him pretty much completely at his mercy. And after all the shit that he went through, there would be no hesitation. But we did pick the mentally ill route, didn't we? This is when Saya appears and restrains Koji with a bunch of slimy appendages. Initially he thinks it's Yo that's still alive, but that's when Fuminori tells him the truth. Simply imagining what the thing restraining him would look like is already enough to drive him insane. and his desperate scream is cut off as Saya shoves a tentacle down his windpipe and fucking snaps his neck easily, despite having trouble doing that with a middle-aged man like 2 days ago. Koji falls down like a sack of bricks and with an expression of petrified terror as Saya begins to feast on his body. Fuminori simply stays there, watching as he processes the pain of his wounds, and he struggles to retain consciousness, until the moment that Saya flops to the side and begins to tremble. It's not a cute tremble like yippee food, but it's a more agonizing tremble. She's very clearly in pain. Fuminori immediately gets up and rushes over to cradle her body. She was pale and drenched in sweat, so his first theory was that eating Koji might have poisoned her. Maybe it was something else, but whatever was happening, it probably was really bad for her. Given everything that Fuminori had done, losing Saya is quite literally the worst thing that could happen to him in that moment, but Saya tries to comfort him. "I'm sorry, Fuminori. I'm fine, really. I never thought that it would come so soon. Don't be afraid. Remember what I said? This is our only hope." "What are you talking about? I don't understand. Stay with me, Saya." "I did it. I decided to do my best. After all, you said that I was pretty." "Stop this, please. Whatever you're doing, I don't want to see you suffer." "Don't be like that. Please understand. They are going to be born. Our children." What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? Thousands of emotions flood Fuminori's mind as Saya asks for him to take her outside, to somewhere under the sky. Fuminori complies and carries her out of the sanatorium while doing his best both to suppress his tears and the pain of broken ribs. He feels like he doesn't have the right to cry, both because he doesn't want Saya to see him that way, and because she was probably enduring a lot more pain than he was. And there, under the moonlit sky, he cradles Saya as they speak their last words to each other. Saya tells him that this was her final and greatest gift to him. "Fuminori, to you who loved me, I give this planet. This world will be beautiful. A world just for us." Her back suddenly shifts and bulges outward, and to use the exact same words used in game, Saya blooms. Flower petals spread from her back like butterfly wings. Is this goodbye? No, it's not goodbye. It's the beginning. The beginning of our world. Radiant motes rise on the wind, painting rivers of light in the frozen winter sky. It's beautiful. Overwhelmingly, painfully beautiful. The shining seeds of life are released into this vast and fertile land. It is boundless healing. It is an eternal blessing. We shall fill this world with our joy. Now we'll be together forever, won't we? Embracing Saya's pitiful, shrunken body, I gaze into the shining sky and let my tears flow freely. Thank you. Thank you for this final gift, Saya. Good ending? The final scene for real this time is of Dr. Tanbo still in Nogai's mountain retreat, and we watch her final moments. She survived there for a couple of weeks and kept herself entertained by decoding and organizing all of Nogai's research notes. There's quite a lot of lore on Saya here and speculations on what exactly she might be, but I'll get to that after I explain the other ending. Once she's done, she drinks the last drop of her liquor, then heads to a nearby mountaintop to enjoy her last moments as a human before Saya's infection takes her over. And yeah, it's bittersweet. Oh, fucking no, let's see the other one. So, if you actually chose the sensible option to call Dr. Tanbo, Koji tells her that Fuminori was not only killing a bunch of people, but he was also eating them. Dr. Tanbo tells him that based on what she's found out on her side, if they were indeed going to deal with the thing called Saya, they would be in for a tough time. Koji goes back to his apartment to rest a bit and then rendezvous with her at a restaurant late at night to prepare and discuss their plan of attack. We see from their interaction that Dr. Tanbo is hesitant to spill the beans to Koji, warning him multiple times that if he just leaves things as they are right now, he could probably recover from the trauma in a couple of years. However, if he truly goes down the path she's taken, there is no coming back. During this conversation, we got quite a few insights into her mind, and how the investigations of Dr. Ogai's experiments made her into the person she is today. For example, she tells Koji that the gun she carries is not actually hers, but rather she stole from her father. Not to shoot someone, but simply because the events with Ogai at the hospital made it so that she couldn't sleep properly. A gun is a very great thing to have, you know? It really is. You can use it to blow your enemies away, and if that doesn't work, you can always stick it in your mouth and pull the trigger. Doctor, you need help. One last time, she pleads with him to just leave things as they are, but Koji insists that he wants to go all in. She concedes and hands him Ogai's research notes. Besides being a horror show, we get a few insights into Saya here. Most relevant of them is the fact that her skin isn't fibrous but rather lenticular, similar to that of snakes. It's highly resistant to cuts and piercing damage, and can expand and contract omnidirectionally, meaning that almost any laceration would close instantly. Koji skims through the research and initially thinks that it's a draft to some horror novel. Even seeing all the things written there and seeing how vehemently the Dr. Tanbo claims them to be true, he's still kinda skeptical. It made a lot more sense to believe that the brain damage sustained by Fuminori during the accident made him to become some sort of homicidal cannibal. But regardless of which version of the story was true, he was absolutely determined to kill Fuminori. That was his only goal, and if facing the abyss Dr. Tanbo was presenting to him was the only way to do it, then he would be more than willing to go through with it. Dr. Tanbo smiles, then presents him the secret weapon to deal with the creature. She produces a thermos from her bag and tells him that while he's taking care of Fuminori, she'll deal with Saya. And so, Koji calls Fuminori and tells him that he's ready for the confrontation. On that night, one of them would die. Koji goes with Dr. Tanbo to his car, and she hides in the trunk, then heads over to the location Fuminori gave him. The only thing is that Fuminori fucks around with Koji a little bit by sending him to the wrong location a bunch of times, but by the fourth time he arrives at the sanatorium. He leaves the car with his gun and flashlight and signals to Dr. Tanbo that they are at the right place. Then he heads inside. Okay, so here the events play out in pretty much the exact same way they did on the other ending up until the point when he's fighting Fuminori. Koji gets the upper hand on him, Fuminori gets knocked to the floor, but then Saya shows up and restrains him with a bunch of tentacles. At this moment, Dr. Tanbo rushes down the corridor and shoots Saya, making her let go of Koji. In one swift motion, she tosses the thermos over to Koji and instructs him to spill its contents onto Saya. As she's on the floor writhing in agony from the shot, he unscrews the lid and pours liquid nitrogen onto the fucked up flesh thing at his feet. He can tell that it's effective as it begins to scream in immense pain. Naturally, Fuminori is mega pissed off, so he immediately rushes over to Dr. Tanbo with his axe. Mind you that she still has another round loaded in her shotty, but wouldn't it be funny if her gun jammed here? It would, and it did. As she's trying to unjam her gun, Fuminori cleaves down her shoulder and ribs and the axe lands in the middle of her chest. But in those last seconds of life she still had left in her, she managed to load another round. She aimed her gun not at Fuminori, but at Saya. She pulls the trigger, and half of Saya's body is deleted into a frozen red mist. Organs and foul-smelling fat begins to spill forth from the open side of her body as she collapses onto the floor. Even with her advanced regeneration, this wound is too grave to heal. Fuminori watches as the only thing he loved, the only thing that kept him in this world, is brutally executed. His manic expression loses all color, as does his purpose. Slowly, almost like a machine, he removes the axe from Dr. Tanbo's body and turns its head to warn him. The weapon describes an arc through the air that cleaves Fuminori right in the middle of his face. It sinks about an inch, but it isn't enough to end him. He pulls the weapon out again, and with the last ounces of his strength, he repeats the movement. He falls face first into the floor. Good ending? The last scene for real this time is of Koji on his apartment as he's waking up from a nightmare. The events of that night left him traumatized beyond repair, and even though he was being heavily medicated, he was still suffering from some heavy side effects. He goes over to the living room to smoke his 20th cigarette of the last 24 hours, and he hallucinates Dr. Tanbo drinking coffee at the dinner table. She's deathly pale, and her left arm hangs loosely from her split shoulder. The two talk for a bit, and we find out that he kept Ogai's revolver and bought one single bullet to go with it. One bullet to promise him salvation in case he ever finds himself sinking deeper into the abyss. Alright, before we wrap this up, I did tell you that the Call Fuminori ending gave a few insights into what Saya was. And indeed, while we can't tell for sure what she really is, Ogai's notes gives us a pretty good idea. So, according to his notes, Saya is essentially an extra-dimensional reconnaissance drone that basically flies over to various different fertile worlds to do what life always does: survive and reproduce. And her strategy for doing so is basically hijacking the most advanced species of that planet and using it to take control of the biosphere. This basically refers to how Saya wanted to learn a lot about humans and Earth so that she could properly devise a strategy for taking it over. Her species basically is capable of reading the target's genome and overwriting it with its own DNA to remake it in its own image. According to Ogai's theory, once Saya learned everything she could about humanity, she should have started the last stage of her invasion. But she didn't. According to his hypothesis, among the books that he gave to Saya, there were also many works of romantic fiction, and that made Saya believe that the concept of reproduction was intrinsically tied to the concept of love. In learning everything about humanity, she developed behaviors akin to that of a human, and among them was the desire to be loved. Since she believed that to be an essential step, she couldn't go through with her plan. She had to find someone who would love her first. Okay, so now the theories. First of all, which is the best ending for real? While they are all god-awful, all three of them could be seen as the best ending depending on what parameter we're using. If we consider minimizing suffering as our metric, the first one, that lands Fuminori in a mental hospital forever, is probably the best one. It's the one where least people die, and even though Saya is still out there, she would only have a chance of going through with her invasion plan if she found someone with the same condition as Fuminori. Even though she could now just find some random guy and fuck with his brain, given the experiences that she had with the neighbor Yosuke and the trauma that comes with it, I doubt that she'll be doing that anytime soon. The most likely outcome is that she'll go into hiding, eventually be found out, and then killed in one way or another. If we consider maximizing safety as our metric, then the Call Dr. Tanbo ending is probably the best one, since it's the one that most definitely kills Saya. Even though Koji is traumatized for life, and even though Ogai's research is still out there at least isn't an apocalyptic organism roaming the streets of Tokyo anymore. And if we consider maximizing happiness as our metric, then technically the Call Fuminori ending is the best one? I know that there's the whole apocalypse thing that happens and shit, but everyone who got turned into flesh monsters don't seem to be complaining all that much. Maybe it's because they're enjoying it, maybe it's because they don't have mouths to complain, but it's just like playing tag. Once you're it, you'll be pissed off for a little bit, and then your next real objective is to go out and tag other people. Okay, but objectively speaking, this is probably not a good ending, since it will either result on the recreation of anime or the complete annihilation of all life on Earth as we know it. The best one is the one that renders Koji traumatized. It's a messy one, but it's the one that completely nullifies collateral damage. Two more things before we wrap this monster of a video up. First is that Ogai's notes mention the Silver Key, which is basically an artifact from the Lovecraft mythos that enables people to travel through space and time. Ogai says he used this key to make contact with Saya, and the implication is that Saya is basically a creation of Yog-Sothoth, the most powerful deity of the Lovecraftian pantheon and the one responsible for ruling over all reality. It looks like this, and it's so powerful that its dreams are capable of creating entire universes, with our own being basically a product of its synapses firing randomly. As soon as bro wakes up, the universe ends. Another thing I thought about is that the special procedure Fuminori went through after the car accident was probably something designed either by Ogai or even Saya herself. What else could explain the specific side effects that he has? The way he sees the world seems tailor-made to help Saya's quest, so I find it hard to believe that it was a coincidence. And finally, a question that people asked me while I was making this video is that, what's the point? Why make something so dark and depraved? Why tell a story so imbued with suffering and awful things? The best answer that I had to give is because of curiosity. Morbid curiosity. It's one of the most central aspects of the human condition, and like it or not, we are fascinated by horrible things. Sometimes because it's fun, sometimes because it's awful, but primarily because satiating it is a way to gain information about an event without necessarily putting yourself in danger. Ever noticed how almost every piece of media, be it games or movies or whatever, contains violence in it? The desire to learn about those stories don't make you sick or depraved, it's just a part of the human experience, and it shows up every now and then. You only become depraved when you're actually trying to create or recreate the morbid situations you're curious about. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you for sticking with me through this fucking mess. If you need a palette cleanser after this one, I'll leave the r/ibleach subreddit linked in the description. I'm not even gonna bother putting a funny bit in this end part because I am very tired. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this. As a small YouTuber, every second that you spend watching my videos means a lot to me. So yeah, that's about it. Take care, you guys.